And welcome to another Warrior Creed live stream with me, the radical Majid Nawaz. Today we are on the topic of the local elections here in the United Kingdom, upcoming in a couple of days. And that is on your screens right now, our view and our stance. Labour are finished, in particular during the course of this live stream with this opening graphic for you on the screens. Labour are finished. We're going to break it down for you in the following way. As you should see on your screens now, this is the headline for today's stream, Warrior Creed live stream, and that is UK local elections. Muslim vote to destroy Labour strongholds. And really, what today will be about will be to break down how exactly that's going to happen, and demonstrate how the general sentiment of the Muslim vote in the UK will end up damaging the Labour Party most of all, first and foremost. And then after that, of course, there will be some other interesting observations to make. But of course, as should be clear by now, the elections are coming up in 2 days' time. That's the nationwide UK local elections on the 7th of May 2026. It is going to mark a significant shift in the United Kingdom away from Keir Starmer's Labour Party and towards more populist parties. In the Labour strongholds, this shift is likely to be reflected in the form of the vote for the Green Party as a viable alternative for Labour voters, headed by Zach Polanski. And in those Conservative Party areas, as well as, interestingly, Labour red wall areas in the Midlands and the North, the populist shift is expected to go strongly towards the Reform Party, because they were previously the blue Labour voters who had abandoned Labour in the 2019 general election, whom Keir Starmer was able to take back in the 2024 election. That's the red wall, the Midlands and the Northern voters. And now in the local elections in 2026, it is fully expected that that vote will hemorrhage, and Keir Starmer and the Labour Party will hemorrhage votes in those areas, and they will go instead towards Nigel Farage's Reform Party. That is the blue Labour or the red wall voters, those who, interestingly, swing their vote between Conservative and Labour, are more likely this time around to vote for the Reform Party under Nigel Farage. So we are expected in the nationwide local elections to see significant gains made by the Green Party from Labour Party strongholds because of the marginal influence of the Muslim vote in those areas. And we are also expecting to see a even more significant swing towards Reform, because Reform will benefit from the combination of disaffected Tory voters and disaffected blue Labour voters, known as the red wall voters. They will all go to Reform. That's a summary for you. We're going to break some of this down over the course of the stream right after we play the opening credits. So don't go anywhere. You're listening to the radical Majid Nawaz for the Warrior Creed live stream.
You are now about to witness the strength of street knowledge. Witness the strength of street knowledge. Street knowledge.
Terrorize the jam like troops in Pakistan.
Street knowledge. Street knowledge. Quick service announcement brought to you in part by Warriors.
Damn, that shit was dope.
And welcome back. Indeed, it's right. The local elections here in the United Kingdom, these are nationwide local council elections. They are not elections for constituency MPs. They are rather elections for councillors to run the local councils in each borough or ward. And those elections are in 2 days' time. And the top headline is that the Labour Party under Keir Starmer are expected to be absolutely devastated, with Labour strongholds moving towards the Green Party and Muslim voters in those strongholds making a very significant marginal contribution, using my words carefully here, a very significant marginal contribution to that shift away from Labour to the Green Party in Labour strongholds. As for Conservative strongholds, there is expected to be a very significant shift towards the Reform Party and away from the Conservative Party, aided indeed by the Red Wall voters, or those former Labour voters who are known as Blue Labour, also shifting towards reform, and that's in the Midlands and the North. Let's begin breaking some of this down for you. That was the summary. That was the top line summary for you. But as we've said, that a particularly interesting angle here with the local elections is the way in which the marginal Muslim vote will impact significantly the party of government currently, and that is the Labour Party. On your screens now, you see again the graphic. The Labour Party are finished, and we're going to take you first of all to a report from the Times. And the Times newspaper on your screens now states clearly in its headline, Muslim voters rank Gaza over the economy in local election poll. That's from the Times on the 4th of May. And so going to that particular headline, and just to break it down for you a bit, this is a policy exchange survey that was conducted today by the JL Partners, the polling company, for Policy Exchange. And then the Times newspaper has run a headline, and it's the point they're making is that the Labour Party are going to be, they're going to suffer significantly from the loss of that Muslim vote. And for those of you who are interested in the details, we will, of course, include all of the receipts for that in the Radical Dispatch, the written version of this stream tomorrow. But for the moment, we're just going to read a section of that article that we showed you and break some of it down for you. So that's from, again, for you, for those of you looking for that particular article, 4th of May, yesterday, in the Times newspaper, Muslim voters rank Gaza over the economy in local election poll, making it clear that the way that the Muslim voters intend to prioritize which party they vote for, they have prioritized the issue of Gaza over even the fact that the economy is an issue that matters to them as well. Let's read it for you. The war in Gaza, it says, ranks above the economy in determining how Muslim voters will cast their ballots at this week's local elections, according to polling. A quarter of Muslim voters in key battleground areas said the conflict would determine their vote, a greater proportion than those who said the economy, housing, healthcare, or crime would be the deciding factor, compared to only 5% of the public overall. The survey, conducted by JL Partners for think tank Policy Exchange, suggests the war in Gaza is driving a sharp shift away from mainstream parties and towards smaller parties and independent candidates. Now, this observation is interesting because of the fact that in the last general election, that's the election in which Keir Starmer came to power in 2024, those of you who are regulars will remember that even though this was that 2024 election was a Labour landslide, we made it very clear on the Warrior Creed live stream as that unfolded at the time 2 years ago, and we'll come to some of those Radical Dispatch headlines in a moment, that even though this was a Labour landslide, it was also one of the most marginal elections in British history. And that's why we said we're using our language carefully, and the word marginal keeps appearing. It is probably opportune at this stage for us to explain what we mean by the word marginal and what work it's doing in this context. So even though in 2024, Keir Starmer won across the country for the parliamentary elections, known as the general elections, in a landslide victory, each particular individual seat that Keir Starmer won in was only won by a small margin. And so each seat took the Labour MP over the line, which is over the number needed to get the most amount of votes in that constituency for any one given party. But usually that hovers around 30% or so. But whichever party gets the most votes gets the entire seat. However, this system, even though it means they get a MP allocated for that constituency in parliament by merely getting more votes than the other parties, the system doesn't account for how thinly that majority for the party that got the most votes is. Now, in this 2024 election scenario, it was a very thin amount of votes in each seat that the Labour Party won by. So even though nationally it looked like a landslide because they were returning a vast majority of MPs, in each individual seat, those MPs were only holding on to that seat by a very narrow margin. And that's why the word marginal is important. And that's why the word marginal is doing a lot of work. And it's why it deserves to be doing a lot of work, because that kind of victory isn't a landslide in the real sense. It's only a landslide in the parliamentary sense, not in the voting sense. Because, of course, when you realize that even though Keir Starmer has a overwhelming parliamentary majority in a parliamentary landslide, it wasn't a landslide in electoral terms. It was a razor-thin marginal victory in each seat, meaning he only won by a tiny amount in each constituency. So that kind of victory is particularly sensitive to a change in the winds. And a change in the winds is what we warned about in 2024 when that victory first occurred, by making it very clear, and regulars will remember this, that this was one of the most marginal victories in British history. And of course, Keir Starmer will regret the day that some of those scandals which are now coming out about him came out, because it will eliminate his marginal victory. Well, this is the day we're beginning to see it. In 2 days' time, we'll have local elections in the United Kingdom, and the extent of the damage on the marginal victory of the Labour Party in each area will become clear. That very sensitive to a change in the winds style of victory is about to experience a change in the winds, and the key marginal difference in each seat, meaning that tiny amount by which the Labour Party got a majority of votes in each seat, was affected primarily, that tiny amount, by Muslim voters. And the Muslim voters are now abandoning the Labour Party, affecting the tiny amount by which they won in each seat. Now, the only caveat we're going to make here is all of that applied to the 2024 general election. In other words, the parliamentary elections. What we're about to have in 2 days' time are local elections for local councillors, not for members of parliament. So though the analysis holds, because the sentiment is real and the sentiments holds, and it's going to be reflected in voting patterns, the effect it has will be delayed insofar as seeing it vis-a-vis members of parliament, because we haven't yet had a general election that requires a majority of parliament to vote for one, or for 5 years to expire. And of course, only 2 years or so have gone by so far. So a general election won't happen as of yet, but we will see the impact of these marginal swings, in particular with the Muslim voters that the Times article today is speaking of, based upon that policy exchange survey conducted for them by JL Partners. We will see that marginal swing have the impact that it's expected to have on the local elections result, and you will very likely see a swing towards Greens, away from the Labour Party, not least on the issue of the cost of living, but also in particular because of the marginal Muslim influence, because of the Gaza issue. That's people that are going to vote, used to vote Labour, going to vote Green. Likewise, you see that effect, as we stated, in the red wall areas towards the Reform Party. Now, continue reading from that Times article today. Yesterday, to carry on reading from it. Across all voters, it says, the cost of living remains the dominant issue, with Muslim respondents ranking economic concerns, education and welfare similarly to the wider electorate. So far, so good. However, the conflict in Gaza ranked above the economy, housing, healthcare and crime among Muslim voters when asked which issues would determine their vote. So even though Muslims ranked economic concerns, education and welfare similar to the rest of the country, when asked what at the end of the day would their vote come down to, Uh, it came down to, for Muslim voters, it came down to Gaza, which would be a determining factor for how they voted, even though they agreed all the other issues were important. Now, that's an important point from the Times there, because we're talking about not what you deem to be a concern, but what you deem will affect how you vote. They are very related, but slightly different questions. And of course, that's because human beings have multiple priorities, multiple things they care about. When push comes to shove, and you have to make a finite choice, a pragmatic choice about who you will lend your vote to, that's going to come ultimately down to what pushes you over that line on any one given particular issue. For Muslims, it happens to be, as this survey demonstrates, it happens to be Gaza. To carry on, reading from the Times article, the poll also found strong support among Muslims for policies linked to the conflict. Nearly half wanted to ban Israeli built technology from the NHS, while 59% supported increasing income tax by 1p to the pound to fund reconstruction in Gaza. Now, again, this sounds quite alarming, perhaps, because of the issue of a call for a change in policy to some technology provided by Israel to the United Kingdom, for example, the NHS. And so, with that in mind, and we're going to carry on giving you our breakdown, but with that in mind, there is a caveat, and that caveat is on your screens right now. Before we carry on, the same poll, just so people don't get too scared, the same poll also found the following. According to Professor Alan Lester, um, on his social media, the majority of British Muslims do not support severing ties with Israel. This is from the same poll. They were asked, do you support or oppose the UK severing all political, economic, security, and technological ties with the following? Israel. And even though it is worrying that, strongly support still reaches 26%, the majority do not support it, according to these figures here, though a strongly support there is still a concerning number. And this is a theme we're going to come to throughout what this polling has found. But we're going to separate at this stage the impact this polling will have on the local elections. And that impact is, as we have summarized from the start of this stream, it's going to impact in a way that will have a devastating impact for the Labour Party and for the Conservatives, and a swing towards the populist left and the populist right. That's its impact. But there's a separate conversation that is also needed about what this poll or these polling figures indicate about Muslim attitudes, British Muslim attitudes towards Islam and Islamism. And that separate conversation outside of the general elections is still a conversation that needs to be had, and is a longer term conversation about identity, integration, and immigration in Britain. The three I's. So, identity, integration, and immigration. Those conversations, even if, for example, reform voters may seek some solace and comfort in the devastation of the Labour Party vote, there will be areas of concern around those three I's, even with the marginal British Muslim vote going to the Green Party, because on the issues of identity, immigration, and integration, those three I's, the Green Party, I think, fair to say, performs rather unwell, or not as good as one would hope for on those three topics. So there is a separate medium to long term conversation to be had, which we'll also come to in this stream on the issue of those three I's. But for the moment, we're still on the topic of their impact on the general election per se. Again, from the Times, we've got a very clear line in the article today. It states 3 in 5 Muslim voters said they would consider backing pro-Gaza independent candidates to prevent Labour winning locally, while nearly half would consider supporting the Green Party to do so. So it's making it clear in the polling, at least, that Muslims are seeking to deliberately punish the Labour Party. And this is a sentiment which I think is pretty relatable. So we've made this clear before. I live in a safe Labour seat in London. And so the overriding direction of my vote is steered tactically, because in the system that we've described here, known as the first past the post system, where the party with the most votes in any one seat gets the MP for all of that seat, that's the first past the post system. One of the blind spots we said about that system is it doesn't take into account the marginal victory in each seat, meaning an MP could have won literally by a razor thin edge, and is therefore particularly vulnerable to losing that seat again in a by-election any time if it's triggered. So as well as that blind spot in the first past the post system, the other blind spot is that if you add up the totality of all of those humans who voted for all the other parties, other than the one that happened to get the largest lion's share of the vote, they usually add up to more votes than the one that got the lion's share of the vote. In other words, always is the case, more people don't want their member of parliament than who voted for him. But, that's how votes work. There's not much you can do about it. But what it does mean is that those who didn't vote for the MP that got the lion's share of the votes, their vote is usually wasted because it doesn't get used a second time. The only vote that then counts is the vote that goes to the MP that got the lion's share. All those other people that voted for all the other parties, their vote goes nowhere beyond that. That's known as a wasted vote. Now, the only relevance of that, because again, people might be thinking, so what? That's how votes work. Yes, but its impact psychologically is relevant when it comes to local and general elections, because you have voters such as myself living in areas in which there is absolutely no chance that, for example, the Reform Party under Nigel Farage would win. So this becomes then an issue of tactical voting, how best to use a vote that would otherwise be wasted. And so people make calculations. I know, why don't I use my vote to seek the destruction of the Labour Party so that at least nationally it changes the picture? The Labour Party end up no longer having a majority in Parliament because I voted tactically, removed their MP, and that gives other parties a better chance at getting a majority in Parliament and forming government. That's a tactical vote. And that's what tends to happen to those wasted votes in Labour strongholds. People end up voting tactically. Now, what you're going to see as a result, because it's clear that the marginal Muslim vote prioritizes the Gaza issue higher than most other issues when coming to how to vote. And because Labour's victory in many of its London stronghold seats was a very marginal victory, and the percentage of that margin was in particular determined by its Muslim voters, this Gaza issue is indeed going to swing that seat in the direction of either the Green Party or, where they're standing, independent British Muslim candidates who are standing on the single issue of Gaza. Now, that latter point is also quite relevant because the Health Secretary himself, Wes Streeting, won in his seat in Ilford in the 2024 general election by only 500 votes. Those of you who were watching our Warrior Creed live stream at the time 2 years ago will remember this example. 500 votes, the current Labour Minister or Health Secretary, Wes Streeting, member of the Cabinet, Secretary of State, only won by 500 votes in Ilford, and the person that came within 500 votes to beating him was independent British Muslim hijabi Palestinian candidate Leanne Mohammed. She came within 500 votes to beating the Secretary of State for Health in a Labour stronghold seat without a party backing as an independent candidate. And that's why, by way of that one example in a Labour stronghold in London for the Secretary of Health, Wes Streeting, it's why this is such a big deal. Now, of course, again, remember, the elections in 2 days are local. Even though they're nationwide, they're for local councils. They're not parliamentary elections. So Wes Streeting's seat is safe for now. But whenever a general election is called, depending on what happens in 2 days' time, say, for example, in Ilford, in Wes Streeting's seat, if much of his council turns green or turns independent, like Lian Mohammed, who came within 500 votes of beating him, then again, the writing is on the wall. It's a sign for how things are going to pan out. And that's what we're saying is going to be among the most likely scenarios. The Labour Party will suffer severe damage in its Labour strongholds. And again, from the Times yesterday, just to continue reading from that article for you, just to reinforce that point again, it says Labour's support among Muslim voters has fallen sharply since the last general election. And it was already down in that general election. It's fallen even further since then. So imagine 500 votes between Wes Streeting, Secretary of State for Health for the Labour Party, and the second place, Lian Mohammed, independent British Muslim hijabi Palestinian candidate. Only 500 votes between them, and Labour has lost even more support since then, since 2024. So these seats are incredibly fragile, though again, this is only local elections, not national parliamentary elections. So the parliamentarians are safe for now, but their local councils are about to become obliterated. To continue reading from that Times article, Labour's support among Muslim voters has fallen sharply since the last general election, dropping from 41% in 2024, which was bad enough, remember, because of that 500 figure, to 33% now, while the Greens have risen from 18% to 27%. Support for independent pro-Gaza candidates stands at 14%. The polling suggests that Labour is now as unpopular among some Muslim voters as the Conservatives and Reform UK, with similar numbers willing to vote tactically to block each party. And we did mention that tactical point. Well, there you go. And to carry on from the Times, based on a survey of 1,006 British Muslims in areas including Greater London, the West Midlands, Greater Manchester and West Yorkshire, the poll suggests that the Israeli-Palestinian conflict is driving this shift, particularly among younger voters. Among Muslim respondents aged 18 to 24, pro-Gaza independents were the most popular choice, with support rising to nearly 3 in 10, and younger voters were significantly less likely to back Labour than older people. Now, this is a particularly interesting result from this polling, because it indicates that the Labour Party has lost track with the future, its younger voters, who are now overwhelmingly turning towards independence, but certainly turning against the Labour Party. So they are hemorrhaging support among the younger voters, which is effectively their future gone. The Labour Party is about to be devastated, and most likely what could happen in such a scenario is once they return such negative results across the country's local elections, there may well be a leadership challenge against Keir Starmer in an attempt to replace him as leader. Because Labour control the majority in Parliament, they would figure or calculate that if they punish Starmer for the loss this May, they can then put a fresh leader in place, so that whenever a general election is called, they'd have a fresh face to contest that general election. And because they control the majority in Parliament, therefore they control government. The nature of the parliamentary system is thus there's no separation of powers. Because they control Parliament, they can determine when within a 5-year window to call a general election, and they could then do so at a time that they think would suit them. So with a fresh leader. So that's how it would likely unfold after the local elections. A devastating result for the Labour Party, a leadership challenge to Keir Starmer, and then Starmer being replaced by somebody that the Labour Party would hope would stop them hemorrhaging votes to the Greens in any upcoming general election. That's what it probably looks like. And of course, Radical Media will publish all of the poll findings for you tomorrow in the written version of this stream via the Radical Dispatch. If you go to majidnawaz.substack.com, find the Radical Media page there. All of the receipts for this conversation we posted there in the Radical Dispatch. And behind the paywall, you will be able to access the podcast version of this stream, as well as the paywall content for the Radical Dispatch. So we encourage everybody to not only subscribe, to become a premium subscriber and join our paid membership as well. Now, moving specifically to the breakdown of the Muslim marginal vote and those seats in which that marginal vote will have an impact, after which we'll go to the red wall votes and demonstrate how they'll have an impact the other way for the for the Reform Party. So let's first of all stick to the issue of the impact of these votes on the impact of Muslim votes on this for the moment. Screens now. You should be able to see the conclusion of the researcher who commissioned this poll from JL Partners at Policy Exchange, Dr. Rakib Ehsan. Now, Ehsan says, he's the report's author, it's on your screens now. He says the data suggested that Labour faced further punishment from Muslim voters at the local elections, with gains likely for independent candidates and the Greens in areas with large Muslim populations. So far, so good. That's what we've been explaining. But we're going to move down. The Daily Mail reports the same, so we'll show you that headline as well. The Daily Mail headline, 4th of May, Daily Mail, Keir Starmer is facing a Muslim voter crisis as poll finds that more than half will tactically vote to boot Labour out this Thursday, with support collapsing from 80% to just 33%. And there you see also the concern that we mentioned about tactical voting. A lot of the motivation here may not necessarily be pro-Green or even pro-Gaza, though it clearly would be pro-Gaza, but maybe not as harshly anti-Israel, than driven by a desire to punish Labour and kick them out, and therefore voting tactically to do so, as the poll suggests. So you see that headline there. Now, this is something we're going to just show you one more thing here before we turn the shared screen off again. This is something, a phenomenon that we at Radical Media have been assuring is going to be the case since at least 2 years ago. There you can see the headline, Radical Media reports 11th of July, 2024. The headline, Globalist New UK PM. Sir Keir Starmer demands a bigger reset after kneeling before Zod. Now, if you go into that article from 2 years ago, so keep in mind, these are the headlines today. Keir Starmer is facing Muslim voter crisis as poll finds that more than half will tactically vote to boot Labour out this Thursday. And 2 years ago, this is what the Radical Dispatch told you would happen. That's on your screens now. You see it. We'll read it for you. The most acute marginal losses in terms of votes for Labour came from Britain's Muslim communities, which were until recently deemed the core of the Labour vote. And here on your screens is a chart plotting how the Muslim vote was the key marginal vote in Labour seats. You can see there by user Ed Hodgson saying all of the biggest swings against Labour last night happened in seats with the biggest Muslim populations. Now, the key thing to remember here is that was from 2 years ago in the Radical Dispatch. So this is a reflection on the general election that happened 2 years ago. And all of the biggest swings against Labour last night happened in seats with the biggest Muslim populations. What we're suggesting is that in the local elections that occur nationwide in 2 days' time, this effect is going to continue occurring. And the Policy Exchange poll, as reported by the Times yesterday, and the Daily Mail that we've just read to you, that headline, it confirms that this is the direction of travel. A Radical Media brought you this 2 years ago. And we're going to carry on reading there from the Radical Dispatch. 2 years ago, it says all of the independent wins against Labour were taken by Muslim candidates. This was the case except for Labour's expelled former leader Jeremy Corbyn, who comfortably won his own seat campaigning on causes dear to British Muslim hearts. And we see our social media post from 2 years ago there, dated 5th of July, 2024. Anti-Labour independent seat wins. Jeremy Corbyn, former Labour Party leader, Islington North. Shaukat Patel, Leicester South. Ayub Khan, Birmingham Perry Barr. Adnan Hussain, Blackburn. Iqbal Hussain Mohammed, Dewsbury and Bateley. These are all anti-Labour independent general election wins for parliamentarians occurring in 2024, 2 years ago in the last general election. To carry on reading from that dispatch, nowhere has British Muslim anger towards the Labour Party been more evident than in British Palestinian independent candidate Leanne Mohammed's moral victory as she came within 500 votes of unseating globalist acolyte and Labour Health Secretary Wes Streeting. And that's, of course, what we've already just broken down for you on the stream just now. So you would have heard us speak about Liane Mohammed and Wes Streeting. But this is clearly the writing was on the wall 2 years ago. And we also published this particular interview with Keir Starmer, where a journalist asked him about the Muslim vote 2 years ago and how he was hemorrhaging that vote. Take a listen to this.
Prime Minister, you secured a significant landslide at the general election, but in areas where there's a high Muslim population, Labour either lost seats or had their vote share slash. Do you accept that there's a problem with the relationship between the Labour Party and British Muslims at the moment?
Well, the first thing I'd say is this, that very many people voted Labour in that general election who've never voted Labour before. So we now hold seats in parts of the country that have never had a Labour MP. So this is an incredibly strong mandate. Of course, wherever we weren't able to secure votes, I'm concerned about that. But this is a clear mandate for change, for renewal, for a different way of doing politics and a return of politics to service. The days of self-entitlement and self-interest are over. And I'm really pleased to put a strong team on the pitch to start our work and to be completing here in Wales my visits to Scotland, to Northern Ireland and Wales, which is
what about the issue with British Muslims? Trust has clearly broken down there. The election results show that. What are you going to do to try and rebuild it?
Well, we've got a strong mandate. Of course, where we didn't secure the votes, we'll address that. But I don't think there's any disputing the strength of the mandate that we have and that it's a mandate for change, for renewal and for politics as public service.
So this again is material from the 2024 general election. The pattern remains the Muslim swing in those key seats. The largest swing against Labour happened to be in seats that had a large Muslim population, and it was the Muslim voters that swung against the Labour Party. That pattern is set to continue. Keir Starmer, of course, in the last 2 years, his situation has only got worse rather than getting better. Again, from that dispatch 2 years ago, we posted the following thread that we're just going to read for you, though, again, we'll republish it in the written version of the dispatch tomorrow. And this is by Luke Trill. He said, having conducted lots of focus groups with Muslim voters this year, again, this is from 2024, I would be cautious about attributing the shift away from Labour to Gaza alone. I think a good comparison is Brexit acting as a trigger for red wall voters leaving Labour rather than the sole cause. So this particular observer, Luke Trill, is saying that though Gaza acts as the pressure valve, it's really what's going on is it's the trigger for an unanchoring from the Labour vote by its Muslim voters, a bit like how Brexit served as an unanchoring for the red wall Labour voters from the Labour Party. And when they unanchored, they recognized that their social conservatism, even though they were traditional working class Labour voters, but because they were actually working class, they were socially conservative, because most actually working class people are socially conservative. Go figure, liberals. But so because the red wall voters were actual working class, once they unanchored from the Labour Party on the issue of Brexit, they began voting along other lines and therefore voted Conservative, the Conservative Party, instead of, even though they were lifelong Labour voters, because they enacted or activated their social conservatism and chose to vote Conservative. Those same red wall voters will now vote for reform, as we're going to come to. But that analogy holds where Luke Trill is saying on socials, and it's a good observation, that like that, the Gaza issue will unanchor Muslim voters from the Labour Party. How they vote after that? Well, the socially conservative ones will vote for the Muslim independent candidates. Those who are more concerned about the political context of the world will, again, once unanchored from Labour over Gaza, probably vote the Greens, who are, of course, less socially conservative than the Muslim vote generally tends to be. But that's why some of them will end up voting for the Muslim independent candidates, who also share not just the Gaza issue with their Muslim voter base, but in addition, the Muslim social conservatism being a generally more religious community. So this observation holds that the Gaza issue will be an unanchoring from the Labour Party, a bit like Brexit was an unanchoring for the Red Wall voters. But the observations continue. We're just going to read till a couple of more posts from that thread. In discussions, we would hear real frustration over Labour on Gaza, but very quickly it would come back to a broader point that Labour took Muslim voters for granted and that their communities had been neglected, very similar to what you'd hear in the Red Wall post-referendum. The participants in these focus groups would always have more to say about lack of opportunities, crime, and the fact no one listened to them than they did about Gaza. One Muslim woman put it: "There's no point in you tackling world peace when you're the area you live in is a s-hole, shithole." And on Gaza independent candidates, yes, Gaza was front of their campaign, as Brexit was for the Tories in 2019. But again, it was broader. People were often more likely to see them as proper champions for their community who'd stand up for them, not the Labour Party. So this adds a bit of nuance to the Muslim voters migrating away from the Labour Party. And that is that, yes, Gaza, like Brexit did, would act as a trigger, and the trigger results in an unanchoring of a traditional vote pattern. But once that pattern's broken, which way the vote goes, well, the lines that it goes along the lines of what tends to matter most to the people voting. For the Red Wall voters, they ended up voting socially conservative, even though they're working class. And for the heavy Muslim populated areas, it will either go along the lines of social conservatism towards independent Muslim candidates, or it will go along the lines of a Gaza vote to the Green Party. That's how Labour will end up hemorrhaging votes. Now going to the Red Wall areas and the phenomenon there. Again, you should be able to see on your screens from the Tomorrow's Written Dispatch a segment on that coming up on your screens now. And again, we'll read it for you too. It says, Starmer loses Red Wall again. This is our analysis. By winning back 37 of 38 identified Red Wall seats in the Midlands and north of England from voters who had previously switched to the Conservatives in 2019, Starmer's Labour Party successfully rebuilt the Red Wall during the 2024 general election, reversing the losses suffered in 2019. Now he has lost them again. Now we're talking of what's going to come, not just in the local elections in 2 days' time, but any subsequent general election. Starmer has lost those Red Wall votes, absolutely. This time, these voters will go to Nigel Farage and Reform. And this is because of the three eyes we spoke about earlier. If you remember, just to pause here from the screen sharing and to recap what we told you at the beginning of this conversation. And that is, if you remember, whereas in the Labour strongholds, the vote was likely to go towards the left, to the Green Party or Muslim independence, socially conservative, but nevertheless also pro-Gaza. In the Red Wall areas, the vote was likely to go to Reform, and that's because of the three I's. That would be identity, integration, and immigration. Those three I's will, for those voters in working class, white working class, traditionally Labour voter, yet socially conservative, Red Wall Brexit voter areas, those voters this time around, after having been fooled by the Conservatives after they abandoned Labour in 2019, and then becoming disgusted by the Conservatives, voting again Labour in 2024 for Keir Starmer, now realizing that that wasn't the solution to the solution that they thought 2019 would bring, and now realizing going back to Labour wasn't the solution either, they firmly heading towards the direction of Nigel Farage and Reform on the issues of identity, integration, and immigration. And Farage is capitalizing on this to demonstrate a video made by Farage yesterday or put out on his socials. Very clearly a win for Farage to focus on the immigration and integration and identity lines of campaigning. Here you can see on your screens now, we've said this was a good political hand grade for Nigel to lob at this moment. What was the political hand grade? Well, it was this: Nigel Farage's announcement on your screens now. If you vote reform, you will not have an illegal migrant deportation facility in your area. We would hold migrants awaiting deportation in constituencies that vote green instead. You get what you vote for. Here is Nigel Farage on video saying as much, and we're just going to play it for you.
Now, you might remember these scenes being on national news last year. Anyone that comes illegally into Britain on a boat or in the back of a lorry will be detained and deported. But that's going to mean having to detain quite a lot of people who are here already. They should not be free to walk the streets. The policy is very simple. You vote for a Reform MP, you will not have a detention facility in your constituency. But if you vote Green, or those that support open borders in the world, that's where the detention centres are going to be. Equally, I could say the same of Labour and the Conservatives, because they've done nothing to stop it. And what you'll get with this policy, you'll get what you vote for. I mean, Essex.
And that really is an incredibly astute form of political campaigning by Nigel Farage, because it's a win-win for him and a lose-lose for anybody who complains about it. Let's break this down for a moment. So we've said that this intervention was a good political hand grade for Nigel to lob at this moment. It will only work in his favor. What do we mean by that? Well, first of all, those areas such as the Red Wall areas, who are likely now to abandon the Labour Party, and they already abandoned the Conservatives in 2019 after having already abandoned Labour before 2019. Now they're going to abandon Labour again. They are at wit's end. They've tried Labour, they've tried Conservative. Remember, they're traditional working class, left-wing economically, socially conservative Labour voters. They are now at their wit's end because nobody's listening to them, and their towns in the north and coastal towns, a bit like Southend-on-Sea, a coastal town where, you know, these towns have been destroyed, they've been emptied, they've been gutted. Almost every other shop in their high streets is boarded up. There is crime, and drug dealers are open in the streets on the high streets on the weekends. Street dealing, there is violence. There are no jobs. There is a migration away from them by young people. There is very few who see a future in those towns. These voters are at wit's end. Successive governments, the Labour and the Conservatives, have betrayed them, and there is a strong sentiment that whereas their communities keep getting worse and worse and worse, inflation is going up, the cost of living is going up, everything is getting more expensive. Meanwhile, wages are becoming less valuable because of inflation. So income is decreasing and costs are increasing. Meanwhile, they see the social costs of years and years of a lack of integration in this country. They see the social costs of a government that is subsidizing people that have just arrived, subsidizing them with housing, subsidizing them with basic stipends, and people who otherwise have lived here for generations and have no housing or have very few job opportunities are feeling the crunch. All of this, whether you agree or disagree, is irrelevant, really. All of this has led to a political backlash and a rise in populism. So whether you academically disagree with the sentiments as expressed just now by me, it doesn't make a difference. In reality, that populist backlash is already here. It was always going to come because these policies were always going to result in this, beginning with the world economic crash, and the rest was history. So we are where we are. Those Red Wall Labour voters are now incredibly concerned about identity, integration, and immigration, which, by the way, always becomes an issue when something else happens, and that is the cost of living basically goes sky high and the economy plummets and everybody is financially in a dire straits situation. When that scenario happens, typically concerns around identity, integration, and immigration do arise. So Farage's intervention here is a political hand grenade that is well timed, because those red wall voters that, if they were tempted not to ditch Labour from their vote for Keir Starmer in 2024, this kind of intervention will place them in a situation where, because Farage is telling them that if you vote for a party that has been responsible for immigration, then you will get those centres in your area. Those who vote reform won't. This significantly scares those voters in those red wall areas to vote for reform. It doesn't do anything else. It doesn't change the result that's coming in Labour strongholds. Those marginal Muslim voters who were going to vote independent or Green anyway are still going to vote independent or Green anyway. They were never going to vote reform. That was very clear from Matt Goodwin's loss. Matt Goodwin, reform candidate, widely perceived to believe himself, at least, that he was running a by-election and was guaranteed to steal it from the Labour Party as a reform political candidate, and therefore ran in a safe Labour seat. All that happened was he didn't win, the Greens did. What does that tell you? They were going to vote Green anyway. So nothing Nigel Farage says changes the way those people in Labour safe seats are going to vote. Yes, they won't vote Labour. They're going to vote Green or Muslim independents. And so all Nigel needs to do to those people is remind them of how bad Labour are. That's all he needs to do. He doesn't need to, nor should he try to, convince them that he is good. Won't work. It will be a waste of time and a waste of money. And in election terms, that's wasting everything, because time and money are really all you have. So he doesn't need to convince those voters in Labour strongholds that reform is a good choice. All they need to do is convince them that Labour are a terrible choice, and those voters will do their bit, voting tactically to get rid of Labour and vote Green or Muslim independent. As for those areas where reform does have a chance, they are Conservative safe seats and red wall seats. Now, the one thing those two areas have in common is a concern for the three eyes. One only needs to look at Kemi Badenoch these days to see how she's become more right-wing than Rupert Lowe on certain topics. And that's because she's petrified. This Nigerian-born British Conservative Party leader, who had previously said she had ethnic enemies in Nigeria, is now so petrified that the British people are exasperated with this kind of sectarian politics and identitarianism that she is attempting now to demonstrate her patriotic credentials by positioning herself in some instances further, at least to caricature her further to the right of Rupert Lowe on some topics. But that, clearly that's a bit of an exaggeration, but you get the point. She's become, more British than the British, born in Nigeria with her ethnic enemies as she is, because Kemi Badenoch is petrified of what? Of losing her Conservative strongholds to the populist right. In particular here, she's worried about Nigel Farage and reform because they are her strongest competitors. The polling indicates that. So, of course, for Nigel Farage to then say, if you notice in that video, he said, and Conservative and Labour are no different to the Greens. They also allowed all this immigration to happen. If you allow them to remain, then when we're in government, we're going to put the detention centres in your area. That is, remember we said, forget the Labour seats. Farage isn't going to win them. That is a sufficient intervention to scare those Tory voters in safe Tory seats to vote for reform this time around, because it reminds them who put them in this mess. The Boris wave of migration was under the Conservatives. And don't even get us started on COVID and the Conservative Party's role with Matt Hancock and Boris Johnson in the COVID mandates. So those Conservative voters, when Farage says to them, you'll get what you vote for, he's reminding them of what the Conservatives delivered. And if you vote Conservative again, despite Kemi Badenoch's rhetoric, you will get what you voted for, because the machinery behind Badenoch The institution hasn't changed. That's an intervention that it is win-win for Farage, in fact, because it sufficiently scares those conservative voters and makes them realize that they need to perhaps vote for somebody that has had a long history of being against open border migration. And of course, Mr. Brexit Nigel Farage is the most prominent brand when it comes to that. So this well-timed political hand grenade, as controversial as it is, works in Farage's favor. It's win-win for him. The second reason it's win-win is because everybody who's complaining about it are the same people saying it's bigoted to complain about migration. So it's a catch-22 for them. When Farage is saying, well, we'll place the processing centers in your constituencies, if they then complain and say, well, hold on a minute, that's not fair. What about your constituencies? Well, hold on. I thought you were pro-migration. We thought that was a good thing. Surely you should welcome these things in your constituency. And it turns the tables. It's a catch-22 for those complaining about it. And that's another way in which this intervention is a win-win for Nigel Farage. And the third way why it is a win-win is because of pragmatism and practicality. What's that? Well, because ultimately there are going to have to be processing centers somewhere. By definition, whatever you do, whatever policy you have, whichever party comes in, there are going to have to be processing centers to decide who to allow, who not to allow, where are they going to be allocated. And so Farage, by taking this stance, is also telegraphing ahead that if he were to place those centers anywhere, where should they be placed? Surely, this is by going on the offensive now, if you advocate for this policy, you shouldn't complain about the centers being placed in the areas that voted for them. It really does put the others in a bind. Now, at this stage, it would behoove us to say that the policy is probably impractical, probably cannot be implemented for a whole bunch of reasons, not least legal. But that doesn't matter because this is political campaigning. And insofar as the political campaigning goes, Farage played a blinder. This intervention will be to his favor. And that's why what you see on your screens now, when user the London Economic says, Reform UK's latest immigration policy, widely condemned as vindictive and divisive, has triggered a fierce backlash across the political spectrum. We've written, no, actually, the exact opposite of this is true. You should see that there on your screens. Usually that's the case. The exact opposite of what these people say is true. And it is the case in this case as well. Farage's intervention, as we just played for you, rather than losing him votes, gains him votes, and it's a win-win for him. And again, we're going to see that result in 2 days' time in those Conservative strongholds and in the Red Wall Labour strongholds when it comes to the local elections. We're going to see that result in the local councils. Now, another reason, because of those three I's we mentioned in the Red Wall seats, the identity, immigration, and integration debate, another reason why the vote is going to swing to the Reform Party isn't just immigration, but is also the associated social ills that come with immigration. And one of them is grooming gangs, underage rape, grooming gangs. And again, it is something that Keir Starmer, because of the Epstein and Mandelson and Jimmy Savile connection, is going to find incredibly difficult to shake. And again, back to that Radical dispatch from 2 years ago that we published when Keir Starmer won. It's back on your screens now. Radical Media reports 11th of July 2024, so 2 years ago. Remember this article. It's on your screens. You can see the headline. Globalist New York PM, Sir Keir Starmer demands a bigger reset after kneeling before Zod. So in that article, not only did we mention the marginal Muslim vote phenomenon, we've also mentioned the Jimmy Savile, Keir Starmer, Mandelson, and Epstein phenomenon. And now, reading it 2 years later, you can see the point we were trying to make about how this is going to become incredibly damaging for Keir Starmer. We'll just read it for you. It's on your screens. So desperate are corporate media to hide PM Starmer's marginal victory that even the once notable Times of London has been reduced to commissioning middle-aged North London female columnists to write desperate but disgusting puff pieces in ode to his alleged aphrodisiac qualities. Yes, this is a real Times column in the Times of London, dated 9th of July 2024, soon after Keir Starmer's very marginal national election victory. And that's Caitlin Moran, who wrote for the Times. You can see it on your screen there, headlined, Keir Starmer has turbocharged my arousal levels. I feel fruity. My friend didn't say why she had to excuse herself from our group chat about the new cabinet, but we know. I mean, really unbelievably disgusting column about Keir Starmer there by Caitlin Moran 2 years ago. That he's apparently that victory turbocharged her arousal levels. He was an aphrodisiac. Well, we put next to that an image of Keir Starmer dressed in a Jimmy Savile wig, and it's called Starmer Will Fix It because of the following. You can see our radical dispatch from 2 years ago. We'll read the remainder of the paragraph at the bottom there for you. We've said this about the man who failed to prosecute Britain's most prolific and high-profile VIP paedophile, Sir Jimmy Savile. Indeed, Starmer is currently advised by former Blair advisor Lord Peter Mandelson. Lord Mandelson remained a close confidant of paedophile Jeffrey Epstein, even after Epstein's convictions. PM Starmer knows all of this, yet still didn't end his formal relationship with Lord Mandelson. And there you have it, folks. Saying that in the Radical Dispatch 2 years ago, despite the disgusting column by Times columnist Caitlin Moran there about Starmer being an aphrodisiac, we reminded everybody that this Mandelson, Epstein, Jimmy Savile, underage grooming gangs connection is going to come back to haunt Keir Starmer. And here we are, folks. Now is the time. Everybody is aware of the Mandelson connection to Epstein and of Starmer's appointing him anyway, and of the connection of Starmer to Jimmy Savile, because as Director of Public Prosecutions, Starmer chose not to prosecute the British Epstein, who was Sir Jimmy Savile, now deceased. And Starmer, of course, knowing of Lord Mandelson's relationship with Epstein, still appointed him as a British ambassador to Washington, D.C. And that then resulted in this humiliating last couple of weeks with Mandelson's resignation and ultimately an inquiry in Parliament into exactly what Starmer knew, because Starmer alleges he hadn't been told that Mandelson did not clear his security vetting. So why this is important for these local elections coming up is because back to the 3 I's, identity, immigration, and integration. Well, the associated issues with all of these three, identity, immigration, and integration, are the associated social ills that come from a lack of integration, a lack of identity, and a lack of controls over immigration. And those ills include crime, and they include sexual crime. And the underage rape grooming gangs is a very, very clear example of how Starmer, in those red wall seats, is going to hemorrhage votes, because they all now know that it was the Labour Party up and down this country that's not only failed to act, but that was complicit in these underage rape grooming gangs that occurred across the country in white working class areas. And it was an absolute travesty. And Starmer's Labour Party is responsible. And again, this is going to be another reason why the Labour Party will hemorrhage votes in the upcoming local elections in 2 days' time. And this is something that we made very clear, again, in the Radical Dispatch, which once the Epstein-Mandelson scandal was exposed, if you remember our headline article then, which should be on your screens now, you can see it says very clearly there, reported 5th of February 2026 from this year. That's the year Mandelson had to resign. That's the month, sorry, and the date Mandelson had to resign as ambassador to Washington, D.C. And the headline there, Epstein files the Prince, which is Andrew, and the Dark Prince, which is Mandelson. The Prince and the Dark Prince fall. PM Starmer is next. Now, this sentiment is very strong among the electorate. We gave a podcast interview to On a Mission. Ellie on a Mission is the name of the podcast. That's on your screens now about this Mandelson grooming gang thing. We're just going to play it for you so you can hear it for yourselves. This has been released this week. They had evidence of the suspect's DNA on the victim's underwear. And yet still Keir Starmer shut down the case. The same Keir Starmer who was head of Crown Prosecution Service shut down the investigation into Jimmy Savile as DPP, Director of Public Prosecutions. They chose not to prosecute Jimmy Savile. And that same team chose not to prosecute the grooming gang scandal. And there you have it. That is why this topic, the three I's, the identity, immigration, integration question, is going to hemorrhage votes for the Labour Party in those red wall seats. And they will go on the integration and immigration and identity issue. On those three I's, they will not go green. Those red wall Labour voters will go reform in the Midlands and the North. Because it's reform that are talking about that topic, and not the Labour Party. And the Labour Party are, in fact, complicit on that topic. The full podcast that we just played your clip for, Ellie on a Mission, that is available on Spotify and Apple Podcasts. We will publish the links for the full version in tomorrow's Radical Dispatch for you. So that summarizes exactly how the Labour Party is going to hemorrhage votes, both to the marginal Muslim vote and in the red wall area to the Reform Party. That is, again, because of the topic of today on your screens there, UK local elections, Muslim vote to destroy Labour strongholds. That is an update as to how exactly that's going to happen. But there is one more element that we said we want to get back to everybody, and that is the topic of British Muslims, Islam, and Islamism. Because if you recall, we began this stream by citing that Policy Exchange survey by Dr. Rakib Hassan for Policy Exchange, conducted by JL Partners, the polling company. Well, as well as its impact, if you remember, we said there are going to be two separate strands of conversation. One is its impact on local elections. We've just dealt with that. The second element is the medium to long-term concerns around integration of British Muslims in Britain. And that's outside of local or even general elections. It's a longer-term concern about the role of British Muslims in this country and their citizenship, their identity, and their sense of belonging. Now, this poll raises some interesting questions that we feel is appropriate for us to address now in the second part of this stream for you. So on your screens now, again, reported from that same Times article publishing the Policy Exchange polling yesterday. You can see there the Times reports 4th of May 2026. We'll just read it for you. It says the survey also found stark differences in attitudes. A quarter of Muslim respondents said they had a favorable view of the prescribed terrorist organization Hamas, while more held a favorable than unfavorable view of Iran's Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, the IRGC. About 1 in 7 also expressed favorable views of Islamic State or Al-Qaeda, although larger proportions held unfavorable views. Now, before we address some of this, we do need to give a couple of caveats. So let's give the caveats first and then come back to this Times quote that you see on your screens now. But before we comment on that, here are the caveats. Again, from Professor Alan Lester. Caveat number 1. From the same polling, it is also accurate to acknowledge that the majority of British Muslims do not support the IRGC or the Iranian Revolutionary Guard. That's on your screens now. So to really couch what we're saying, let's be very clear. The majority of British Muslims do not support the Iranian Revolutionary Guard. It's from the same Policy Exchange poll. These results are on your screen now. We will publish those results tomorrow. Also, from the same poll, again, as published on Alan Lester's social feeds, more Muslims view Jews favorably than unfavorably. The largest share do not distinguish them to view either more or less favorably than other groups. Again, from the same Policy Exchange poll, more Muslims view Jews favorably than unfavorably. And the third caveat, again, from Alan Lester's socials, the majority of Muslims are concerned about Islamist extremism. Again, that's from the same poll. The majority of Muslims are indeed concerned about Islamist extremism. Now, with those three caveats aside, because that should be reassuring somewhat, that the majority of Muslims do not support the IRGC, do not view Jews unfavorably, or more Muslims view Jews favorably than unfavorably, and the majority are concerned about Islamist extremism. With all of that said, it is important to focus on exactly what the poll in its nuances found. So we go back to that Times report of the Policy Exchange, the very same survey. A quarter of Muslim respondents said they had a favorable view of the prescribed terrorist organization Hamas, while more held a favorable than unfavorable view of Iran's Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps. About 1 in 7 also express favorable views of Islamic State or Al Qaeda. So, even though we gave you those three caveats, it is worth just stopping here and saying, yes, okay, a majority of Muslims didn't say that they held a favorable view of the prescribed terrorist group Hamas. You know, the poll does indicate that. Do be assured. However, it is alarming that a quarter of Muslims respondents in this poll did have a favorable view of the prescribed terrorist group Hamas. That is alarming. It's perfectly normal for British people to find that alarming. It's perfectly normal for anyone, including other Muslims who are not in that quarter, to find that alarming. I find it alarming. Why? Because Hamas is a terrorist organization. It's an Islamist terrorist organization. In other words, it's a jihadist organization. Islamism is not the same as Islam. Islamism is the desire to impose any one version of Islam over society. Jihadism is the use of force to spread Islamism. It's not the same as jihad, which simply means struggle, whether inner or outer in the context of self-defense or just war theory. But jihadism is the use of force to spread Islamism. Hamas is a jihadist organization. It uses force to spread its Islamist agenda. And in being a jihadist organization, it doesn't just target military targets, it also targets civilians. So it's a jihadist terrorist organization. Targeting civilians, no matter how twisted one's justification may be, is unacceptable. And that is a fundamental base red line that can never be negotiated. Anybody that uses just grievances to justify killing children and other unarmed non-combatants because it's the only way, brother. No, this is unjustifiable and it is non-negotiable. Children and unarmed non-combatants are not legitimate targets, and that applies whether or not you're a state or a group. The only difference, of course, is because a state has a monopoly on violence. This is the very theory of a state. Then the only difference becomes that when a state does it, it's a war crime. When a group does it, who don't have the theoretical monopoly on violence, because a group is not a state, that's why it's called terrorism, because terrorism is violence to intimidate non-combatants by a non-state actor, such as a group. When a state does it, it's a war crime. So none of this is to excuse the ethnic cleansing of Gaza by Netanyahu and Israel under Netanyahu. That is a different conversation. When it was happening, this platform, Radical Media, was very clear on calling it ethnic cleansing and exposing all of the necessary information related to Netanyahu's very, very severe shortcomings during that period and beyond. So go back to those Warrior Creed live streams and those Radical Dispatches to do your research and understand where we stand on those topics. But right now, we're talking about Hamas. And in fact, for the very same reason that it's wrong for a state to do certain things, it means even more so it's wrong for a non-state actor who don't have any mandate nor electoral authority in any shape or form, really. It's even worse for a non-state actor to do those things. And so when Hamas has as a matter of policy that it will target non-combatants for the purposes of the ends justifying the means, that makes it a terrorist organization funded as it is by the Iranian theocracy for playing politics in the region at the expense of the Gazan people. So for a quarter of British Muslims to hold a favorable view of this terrorist jihadist organization, Hamas, should be concerning to most ordinary Muslims, let alone anybody else. And of course, this is the work we were trying to do for over a decade, roughly 15 years, when I founded and became founding chairman of our counter extremism organization, Quilliam. The purpose was to try and provide that Muslim response to topics such as this, because it should be non negotiable when discussing topics such as killing civilians. It doesn't matter who's done them. We have absolutely no tolerance for organizations or states that justify doing so. And so it is fair for those who read this survey to be concerned about, even though they're not a majority, it's still a large enough chunk of Muslims in Britain who have a favorable view of Hamas. And it's perfectly fair. In fact, we'd go further and say it is a duty of everybody else to be worried about that 25%, because we have a civic duty, a moral civic duty to our society to challenge those who justify terrorism. Simple as that. And of course, that applies to challenging those who justify ethnic cleansing in Gaza as well. The two don't have to go mutually exclusive. And so, indeed, one suspects for the 3/4 of Muslims who don't have a favorable view of Hamas, they also don't have a favorable view of the ethnic cleansing in Gaza. So the 3/4 clearly demonstrate that it's not a mutually exclusive view. But the fact that there is a quarter of respondents who have a favorable view towards Hamas is a very concerningly high number that must be challenged, and there must be put into place long-term plans to do something about this phenomenon. A quarter of any population supporting terrorism is already too high. Likewise, by the way, the fact that more held a favorable than unfavorable view of Iran's IRGC, or the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, because remember, keep in mind that on the one hand, you're upset with Israel because of their war policy, but you should, for the very same reasons, if not more, be upset with Iran, because not only do they have a war policy, such as funding terrorism in the form of Hamas or bombing Sunni Muslims in Ramadan, as they just did, even though those same Sunni Muslim Arabs were not bombing them. So Iran not only has a similarly objectionable war policy to Israel's, both being ideological expansionist states as they are, Islamism, the Shia Islamist form of Islamism in Iran, and Likudnik Zionism in Israel, ideologically expansive war projects as they both are. But you should be more concerned about the Iranian theocracy, because in addition to that, it's a theocracy, which is a separate ideological objection you should have as a upright civic person. You should not find it comfortable to cheerlead for a theocracy. That stands against everything you claim you want to see, your conception of what you claim is the good life. So again, the fact that more held a favorable than unfavorable view of Iran's Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, even though it wasn't a majority, it's still a large enough chunk that it's fair to be concerned about that. And it's fair to suggest that policies need to be put in place in this country that somehow address this and deal with it. Whatever those policies may be, of course, that's a different conversation as to what they should be. But lastly, this one is particularly disgusting, and any Muslim watching this stream should feel similarly disgusted if they claim they genuinely believe in their values. This last one in 7 also expressed favorable, that's 1 in 7 British Muslims, according to this poll, also expressed favorable views of ISIS and Al-Qaeda. Now, yes, that means 6 in 7 didn't, but come off it. Really. Just stop a moment, and I'm speaking specifically here to my Muslim listeners and those Muslims who don't listen to me but rather hate me. There's no way around this anyway. Pass the message on to them. If I randomly stopped 7 people on the street, and 1 in 7 of those people said that they were fans of Hitler and that they were avid, hardcore Nazi, Azov style Nazis who loved killing people, they were Nazis through and through. That's like 1 in 7 Muslims saying they support ISIS. If I randomly stopped 1 in 7 people in the street and they told me that they were Nazis, you, Muslims who I'm talking to right now, would be crying the biggest victims in this country, right? I'm one of you, right? It's not just to isolate you. Like, we know, everybody knows that if 1 in 7 people in this country reported to being Nazis, we on the left, liberal, Muslim kind of coalition of voters would be very, very upset with that statistic. 1 in 7 Muslims in Britain responding to a poll saying that they have favorable views of ISIS and Al Qaeda is absolutely disgusting. There is no way around it. Yes, 6 in 7 aren't that, but 1 in 7 is too high a number. It is appalling. It is frankly embarrassing and shameful, because ISIS isn't just, they aren't just bad Muslims. You, again, my fellow Muslims, addressing you directly, know full well that ISIS are the modern day manifestation of the Khawarij, those who even rebelled by taking up arms against the very companions of the Prophet Muhammad because they weren't Muslim enough. That is ISIS. ISIS are the modern day Khawarij. You know this. It's not even a controversial point in the Muslim community to say that. So for 1 in 7 to express support for ISIS or even Al Qaeda, it is frankly embarrassing, and the rest of the country has every reason to be alarmed at this figure. It doesn't matter. Those caveats we mentioned earlier, we'll mention them again. Yes, the same survey says the majority of British Muslims don't support the Iranian Revolutionary Guard Corps. Yes, it says the majority view Jews favorably, more so than they do unfavorably. Yes, it says the majority of Muslims are concerned about Islamist extremism. But if you understand the nuances in the community, the extremists have never been a majority. They've always been a disproportionately loud, disproportionately powerful, gobshite minority that does end up intimidating and dictating the terms of the discourse. And it's that gobshite minority who are larger than life who are too prominent. 1 in 7 British Muslims saying ISIS or Al Qaeda are a good thing that's too many. If you'd said to me 1 in 5,000, maybe. 1 in 7, too many. It is shameful. It is disgusting. And my fellow Muslims have to challenge it. Simple as that. Everybody else has to challenge it too. You shouldn't even have to be Muslim to challenge that, frankly. Any human being that says to you they support ISIS, any other human being, male, female, Christian, atheist, Muslim, Jew, whoever you are, has a right to challenge you on that and tell you how disgusting you are for supporting an organization such as ISIS or Al Qaeda, but in particular ISIS. It is embarrassing, frankly. And so, yes, they do have a right to be concerned about that figure. It is not alarmist to be concerned about it. It is indeed perfectly legitimate to say that more needs to be done to help integration in this country. And again, the same polling indicated the following. With everything we've just said, this now should sit in its proper context. You can see it there from the Times, 4th of May. On social attitudes, 52% of British Muslims polled supported making it a criminal offense to depict the Prophet Muhammad, and 63% supported banning the public burning of holy books. Almost a quarter said violence could be justified in response to such acts. So again, look at this. Yes, a majority didn't say violence could be justified, but almost a quarter, again, that's the same quarter that say supports Hamas, a quarter of British Muslim respondents said violence could be justified in response to depicting the Prophet Muhammad in Britain in 2026. Now, look, you can object to depicting the Prophet Muhammad. You can condemn those, perhaps, who can depict the Prophet Muhammad to mock the Prophet or to caricature the Prophet. But to say violence is a legitimate response to that, again, a quarter of respondents is way too many. Yes, it's not a majority, so let's not pretend all Muslims are like that. But stop pretending that a quarter isn't too many. It is embarrassingly too many. A quarter of British Muslim respondents saying violence is the answer to blasphemy is frankly shameful. And again, more needs to be said and done by everybody across the board, but also the Muslims in challenging these attitudes. we acknowledge fully that there are voices out there seeking to challenge them. But while we also acknowledge, and again, let's be honest with ourselves, people, that those who challenge them are roundly demonized and stigmatized. Right? So you've got to understand that these are real issues. So this poll is a mixed bag. Yes, it's good news for the local elections because it's good news for the Reform Party because it leads to the destruction of the Labour Party. That's good news. But the longer term concerns in some of these poll results must not be ignored because of the good news that this is going to lead to the end of the Labour Party, first in local elections and eventually in the general election. And yes, there are also caveats for why such opinions have so hardened among British Muslims. I myself, as regulars will know, have gone through a process in my teenage years of such radicalized views, having then abandoned them as dedicating my life to challenging them. But on your screens now is the very reason why I got radicalized initially as a 14 to 15-year-old. This is from, again, yesterday's Times, the same newspaper that reported those Muslim attitudes, in particular those overly sympathetic attitudes to terrorism, carries this headline: Sarajevo safari hunters competed to kill the prettiest women. Subheading: and all the claims that wealthy Europeans, including Britons, paid premiums to shoot at younger or pregnant women trapped in the Bosnian city in the late 1990s. Yeah, you see that headline in the Times yesterday? Sarajevo safari hunters competed to kill prettiest women. These are human hunting parties that wealthy, rich individuals from across Europe and in Britain paid Serbs to shoot and kill innocent, non-combatant Muslim Bosnians in the Bosnia genocide by sniping at them. That article from yesterday's Times gives you the amount of money that they were paying for. And the most expensive to privately pay to kill by shooting them in the Bosnian genocide via sniper rifle were pretty young Bosnian Muslim women and pregnant Muslim women and children born to Muslim parents from Bosnia. That happened in the 90s. It's the very genocide that radicalized me as a 14 and 15-year-old. So again, with the caveat that yes, we understand why Muslims are so angry. These are the sorts of stories that we used to speak about in the 90s that led to that first wave of severe Islamist radicalization in Britain. It was the 90s that did it. It was the Bosnia genocide that triggered it. So, of course, we understand what causes such radicalization, but that's very different to justifying it. To understand where it's coming from doesn't mean it shouldn't be treated. It still has to be treated. It's still inexcusable. Just because somebody paid a lot of money to sniper innocent, pretty Muslim women and paid a premium to kill the prettiest ones, and paid a premium to kill the pregnant ones, and paid a premium to kill the children in the Bosnia genocide, which was a specific genocide against white, blonde-haired European Muslims in the 90s. Just because that happened, it doesn't mean you've got a right to justify killing innocent, non-combatant human beings from any other background. The quarter of British Muslims surveyed that supported Hamas, or even worse, the 1 in 7 that supported ISIS or Al-Qaeda, should be ashamed of themselves. Despite that history, there is absolutely no excuse to, and not least in Islam, there is no excuse to justify the deliberate targeting of innocent children and non-combatants and the use of terrorism to bring about political solutions. So that is the stream for today. We started off from the top saying that the poll, the survey by Policy Exchange, would have two impacts. One immediate on the local elections, which would be received by the majority of people as good news, and that is the destruction of the Labour Party, led by swings in the most marginal of Labour seats. And those marginal votes would in particular be the Muslim voters who would be leaving the Labour Party, voting either independent or green, leading to the destruction of the Labour Party. That's the good news. And in the red wall seats, of course, those voters going to Reform, leading to losses for the Labour Party in those seats. That's all the good news. And the bad news, though, again means that in the medium to long term, we've got real challenges in this country addressing the identity, integration, and immigration debate. More needs to be done on all three of those. On identity, what a sense of being a modern day Brit with a multi-faith, multi-ethnic society, and yet not multicultural. What that means, yeah? Not multiculturalism, but multi-ethnic, multi-faith society with one identity, the British identity. So what does that mean for identity, for immigration, and for integration for those who are here legally? There is still a lot more to do on all of those three topics, not least because those who have been born and raised here and yet who are Muslim, too many of them fail on the integration question as well. 1 in 7 think ISIS or Al-Qaeda are a good idea. So when I say too many of them fail on the integration question, quite clearly they do if 1 in 7 think ISIS and Al-Qaeda are a good idea. That's all we've got time for this week's Warrior Creed live stream. We'll be back next week at the same time, but also tomorrow we will publish the written version of this stream. Go to majidnawaz.substack.com, become a premium subscriber by paying, not just a free subscriber, to Radical Media, and you can access the podcast version of this stream as well as all the paywalled content of the written Radical Dispatch. Not all of it is published free. There's also paywalled content. We encourage everybody to go over there on Radical Media and subscribe. majidnawaz.substack.com. We cannot do this work without your support. But for the meanwhile, you've been listening to me, the Radical Majid Nawaz, for the Warrior Creed live stream. Until next week.
You are now about to witness the strength of street knowledge. Witness the strength. Street knowledge. Street knowledge.
Terrorize the jam like troops in Pakistan.
Street knowledge. Street knowledge. Quick service announcement brought to you in part by Warriors.